Chris Mogan.
Okay, well, I have got a few slides here, so maybe we could just work our way through those. But I think mainly we've got to try and speak generally about managing anxiety from a practical point of view. Hope you don't mind me asking where you all come from. It's helpful to direct things that way. So I've been, just to give you a bit of background, I've been associated with the Melbourne Clinic here since '87. So I started here. Prior to that, I worked at the Eltham Community Health Centre. It's now a very prestigious Nillumbik Community Health Centre, but in those days it was just two of us actually, about four of us, full-time, equivalent full-time. And that was when my interest in anxiety really took off, because it was a free community health service. And if you're in a free counselling service, you're very busy, especially if you've got a very annoying secretary that every time somebody cancelled, she rang the waiting list. And so I was flat out all day seeing people. And so I was there for 11 years, and that was quite a terrific experience to work in a community, because it was you saw people from the schools and from the preschools, and at that time in 1976 there was an explosion of divorce. I don't know any of you are young enough to remember it, old enough to remember it, but in 1975 the Family Law Act changed, and I started in Eltham in 1976. So it was no-fault divorce, and they just there was so much family disruption, and I don't think it's improved actually. Still a lot of stress created within families from that. So depression is usually considered the common cold of mental health, but in statistically speaking, anxiety is more common. There was a very large chunk of a census. I think it was in about, I just can't remember if I've got this right, about 82 or something like that. And they took a 10,000 sample of people, and they questioned them about their mental health. And it was quite surprising to all of us that anxiety was significantly higher than depression in terms of its occurrence across the board. I was also a bit disturbed the other day when I was on Good Friday, I think. The Age had an editorial on mental health. Anybody happen to flick through the editorial of the Age often? It's quite a very well-written article, but it said what we do know, that 2/3 of people with mental health issues do not receive treatment. So it's pretty overwhelming, really. And those that do receive treatment, 90% of that treatment is medication related. And we would wonder whether that's an ideal thing. Hope I'm not going to offend anybody here. There's probably not too many psychiatrists in the audience here, or GPs for that matter. But I've been working in this field most of my life, and I think it's important to talk to people. That's what we've got to try to develop within people, a strong sense of identity. And some of you are working with young people now, and that's the biggest issue we've got, is sense of identity. So once we've got that inner sense of that I'm all right, I'm okay, and if you've got a general sense that the people you're dealing with are okay, you can set up communication. That's the unique thing that we do. It separates us from all our feathered and furried and fanged and whatever other friends we've got. So the idea of learning to communicate and is the most human thing we can do. And so the basis of my work is to try to help people to get that strong sense of self, that strong sense of belonging, sharing with others, and above all, that strong sense of competence, that I can set a goal and reach that goal and my self-esteem will rise. I know that a large, back in the 80s sometime, General Electric published a report about why they chose staff members. What were the reasons they were the largest employer in the United States, you know, something like several 100,000 employees. And the three, a psychologist picked up on it and wrote an article in a family law, not family law, rather a family journal. Because he said these principles are good principles to run your personal life on, but also your family life on. So the first one was, and this was in order of priority, this was by probably what we would describe as a not all that friendly multinational. Most multinationals back in the 80s were pretty brutal, probably still are, but anyway, the first principle was you had to be kind and caring. So not crushing the other, you know, that sort of spirit of competitiveness among staff. You sell more, you'll be the employee of the week, or you sell more, you'll win a trip to somewhere, and so people would compete with each other. So kind and caring. Second one was that you had to be fun to be around. So the situation was that people always work under stress. We all do. People get tired, people get irritable, it gets hot, a big bill comes in, all these sort of things, things that upset people, put their equilibrium out. So we wanted to be able to ride above those sort of everyday issues. Now, because they didn't want their organisation to be full of kind and caring, fun-loving bimbos, the third quality was a pretty important one, which was competence. People had to be competent. So in other words, you have to... Now, competence is not just about intelligence. Competence is about doing what you say you'll do. Now, if you try and apply that to a family, that if somebody says they'll put the garbage out and they put the garbage out, when you pick yourself up from the floor and have not had to remind the person 15 times at the next ad or at the end of the show, or I'm just finishing this game, but it's an enormously tremendous quality to have, anybody that runs a team, to know that somebody will do what they say they'll do. And we had an example of it. I had a very small example, not a very small example, an example at work today that we had a very troubled man, and I had written to his GP and asked him to send a referral letter because he could be seen by a psychiatrist. Now what happened was he turned up and the letter had not turned up, so the psychiatrist refused to see him. Now we have to wait for another 4 months before we get in to see this person. The person's got very unusual presentation, which you don't run across very much. It's a conversion disorder. You don't see it. But when you do see it, it's very, very worrying, very frightening for the person as well. But the incompetence was, across the board there. I'm not saying we were without fault, but the person didn't deliver when we had written a specific request for that. So those three things, I just want to open up with this particular thing, that these are personal attributes that will increase our capacity to work with other people and our capacity to work under stress. All right, now let's go through these. What? Now what am I pressing here? Yes. Okay, so the basis of my work is the cognitive behavioural model, which stands for CBT, and that equals, in my terms, thinking, affect and behaviour. I know most of you think it means totalisator agency board, but it means how I think, how I feel, affection, emotion, and what I do. So when we look at a situation, we make an appraisal. And that appraisal is going to set up our response. And we're doing it constantly, appraising situations. And when those situations are anxiety-laden, the underlying emotion is threat, fear, doubt, uncertainty, worry, all those different aspects of it. So in our thinking, we have to challenge some of our thinking, accept some of our thinking, allow some of our thinking to develop over time, and sometimes we've got to walk away because those matters, not every matter is resolvable. And they are the matters that create stress, and that's an important distinction for us to make, is that when you cannot resolve something, can't control it, that's a source of stress. You've got to have that wisdom to know the difference between, that's the alcoholic's prayer, isn't it? There to accept those things we can't change. I think it is, isn't it? Don't put your hand up. You don't have to admit that you know the alcoholic's prayer. We all know it. We should know it. It's the, how does it start off? The wisdom, is it? No, the wisdom to know the difference. The courage to accept things that we can't change. The courage to change the things that we can change. And the wisdom to know the difference. It's a beautiful aspiration. And it's been a wonderful guide to so many people, and will continue to be. The second one, about affect, this is the hardest part of all, because our emotions overwhelm us. Unfortunately, people fall into the category of either under-expressing their emotion, they're not in touch with it at all, then it builds up and they over-express their emotions. I think domestic violence might be an example of over-expression of emotion. Road rage. What else? Crime, I suppose. That's violence in the street, the one punch, all this sort of thing. Now what we want to try to be is in touch but not overwhelmed by emotion. And the third element of the CBT model is what we do. I have got a board here. I want to be very practical about this and just explain something to you that I think is should be worked on a lot. That is that the best way to get something done is to start it. And the best way to keep something going is to continue to do it. And so we do a lot of work with hoarding disorder. And one of the things about hoarding disorder is that it's overwhelming. A person just doesn't know where to start. And it becomes, they just live in this world of that they don't notice the amount of squalor, clutter, risk that they are living in. Now, this idea that I'm going to talk to you about is not, I mean, it's a well-known idea now. It's called, it's 30 days to behaviour change. You've all heard about that, have you? Mm-hmm. It's built on principles of behaviourism. And I mean, I can only give you, I'll give you a personal experience of it. We have people, if anybody's heard me talk before, they've probably heard me tell this story, but I think it bears repeating. In the little kitchenettes we have in the clinic next door, there's little packets of biscuits, you know. You can have a cup of tea and eat these rubbish biscuits, you know, the trans fats and sugar and of no use, but very addictive. So I came back one year from my holiday and I thought, right, got to look after myself, be fit and all the rest of it. So I've got to stop eating these biscuits. Now, I know all about behaviourism. So I started a campaign along the lines of no more of these biscuits. Okay, so trial one, okay, good day, no biscuits, whatever. Then I didn't have time for lunch, late afternoon, I need a biscuit, end of trial one. See that? Go along, get up to maybe 10 or so, fail, start again. Now the idea of it is you either, did you have a biscuit or didn't you? No judgment, no put downs, no you're stupid, you're lazy and all the rest of it. Did you or didn't you? Now you can go 20, fail, 3, 25, 18, 17, but every time you're on track, you're doing successive approximations of the desired model. Now, in my case, it took me until the end of May. I came back in January, it took me till the end of May to get 30 days, successive days without biscuits. Now, I didn't eat those biscuits for 3 years after that. Now, I'm trying to say that if you apply that same thing, anybody that teaches music or language would agree that if you can get the person to spend 10 minutes a day practicing their guitar under this principle, they'll become sufficiently skilled to start to enjoy that task. But what happens is people weaken, don't they? You know. Now you can apply that same thing. Did you walk or didn't you? Oh, I broke my leg. No excuses. Did you walk? No. Drinking water. Anything at all, you can change any behaviour. And if you doubt me, check out the CIA website. And they're experts on behaviour change. Actually experts on... That is... for those of us who are students of psychology, it's actually quite a worrying thing in the profession in the United States that the military actually use psychology for changing behaviour and drawing information and manipulating people in ways that do not fit in with ethics and ordinary values. But again, that's a topic we won't necessarily tackle. Now, I want to just add one other thing to this. So that's part A, do something daily. Part B is to chain together chunks of the desired behaviour. So you might go 3 days, then you might crash for a few days, you might go 7 days. But what you're trying to do is just put blocks together of what you're trying to achieve, whether it be exercise, whether it be cleaning up. And we used to do that we still do it in our program for trying to help people to declutter. And so how many days in a row were you able to do one thing about your decluttering? And another way of doing that is also to use a timer. And we've all got timers on our watches. And we can just say, put that timer on and see if you can read for 10 minutes. You know, develop the habit of reading, because it'll help a person to do what we need to learn to do, and that is focus our attention. I'm running all over the place a little bit here, but I've got a method in my madness here. I just want to say a thing about mindfulness that you've all heard about and know about. There are devotees and there are others that have tried their best and so on. But when it comes to mindfulness, I just want to sum it up in this way, that we've got to learn to pay attention. The teachers, and there are some teachers here, and they all agree with me, that if only people would pay attention, that would be the key to learning, is to pay attention. So in our lives, if we are able to focus our attention on target behaviour and give that target behaviour 100% of their attention, that when their mind drifts, not if their mind drifts, when their mind drifts, they refocus. And the fourth thing is repeat number 3, which is when your mind drifts, keep refocusing. Repeat number 3 several billion times. Now, when you do that, you've got mindfulness. Now, you can dress it up with bells and sitars and all sorts of ways, and everybody, I know it sounds like I'm poking fun at it. Not everybody is able to do it, and they lose track of its value. Its value is what I've just described. Focus, attention. When your mind drifts, which you know it's going to, you refocus. It seems an exaggeration, but in my opinion, it's the key to, one of the keys to effective living is the ability to refocus when we notice it. So when you notice your mind has drifted, you don't beat yourself up, you don't say it's too hard, you simply reconnect with the task at hand. So I'm just giving you along the way a couple, so that these are behavioural interventions. This one and what I just described there. If you don't have a 5-minute, if you want to go to my website, you will find some downloads there, the Anxiety Clinic. I've left some cards down the back there if anybody wants them, but on my website, it's nothing special, they're everywhere on the net, but I just happen to give this to all the patients that I see. It's just a 5-minute self-soothing tape. We won't do it now, but one of the first things that I do when I see a patient that comes for anxiety management is we measure their breath. And I'm sure they're teaching you how to do that out at Swinburne. Right. Okay, good. Okay, they'll get to that next semester. It's like the old days when we had our car and we put it in for a service. When we drive in, it's clunkety, clunkety, clunk. But when you drive out, it's purring because they've done, I'm not a car person, but cleaned the points, I suppose, and changed the spark plugs, but it's smooth. Nowadays, the computers do it all. But in those days, there's a very good example of something running in good tune. Now, when you listen, if you have a loved one, and you just say, while I'm watching TV, just measure my breaths for me, will you? Just how many times does my chest wall fall? So the way you do it, it's a simple number one anxiety management technique. Measuring the breath. So rise, breathing in, fall, breathing out. Very simple. Nothing could be simpler. Rise, breathing in, fall, breathing out. Now, to enrich the body, which is the respiratory system, takes oxygen around to every part of our body, which is what's wrong with smoking, because it takes nicotine around to every single cell of your body. We want to take oxygen, and that travels as hemoglobin. Isn't that right? Yeah, it is right. Now, what happens with nicotine is it knocks out the efficiency of the hemoglobin, unfortunately. So someone's come to the wrong room.
Sorry.
That's right, that's fine. So I want to teach you this technique tonight. So you simply have a watch, and on your watch, I'll just do it for you right now. Rise, breathing in, fall, breathing out. Rise, breathing in, fall, breathing out. Now, if you do that, you'll be breathing roughly at 10 or 12 breaths a minute. But when I sit down with a patient and I say, I just want you to count the number of times your chest falls, and the person can range in count from 12 to 30. So you can see that if somebody is breathing at 30 breaths a minute, they're over-breathing. And what we want the person to do is to gradually learn to breathe at 10 to 12 breaths a minute. So you can understand a young man walking into an exam, breathing at 25 breaths a minute. We've all seen it, haven't we, in the exhibition buildings? Do they still go to the exhibition buildings for exams? Well, I can remember it. I remember I was one of those people that went to school. We had tests every term from about grade 1, I think. So the exams weren't a thing that worried me, whereas today kids might come up for an exam, or at least not so much now, but 10 years ago, the year 11 exams would be the first ones they'd ever do. So you'd see somebody in the exam just literally shaking like a leaf. And how can that be fair to that person? So what we want to do is, number one, is slow down the mind and the body. And so slow breathing techniques are very good. And the one, as I said, there's one there, it's free. You just download it and you practice it. Put it on your app. Don't put it on while you're driving, but listen to it while you're in the train or something like that. And because if you have to make a difficult phone call, it's very interesting to say, if I take 5 minutes or 2 minutes to slow down and then make the call, will it be a different call than if I'm making it in an agitated state? So, the breath count is number one. The number two is the slow breathing that I mentioned. The rise, breathing in, the fall, breathing out. And it's transformed psychology in the last 20 years. And those people who have got anxiety can learn to self-manage. I guarantee it. Now, the third thing that we've got to do about anxiety is to learn your safety behaviours. Now, what are safety behaviours? Does anybody hazard a guess for me? What's a safety behaviour?
One of the things you just said. Breath.
Well, yes. I mean, some people do say that. That's a bit of a controversy in psychology, actually. Some people say don't teach relaxation, and believe you me, it's the thing to do. It's the thing to do. When I first came to the Melbourne Clinic many years ago, I'll guarantee it's the same now, that there would be people, and even some of us here, which we won't judge anybody, of course, that's probably got a Valium in their wallet, just in case they need it. But they'll carry it for years because they don't need it once they learn these self-soothing strategies. Now, what I'm saying about safety behaviours, I had a lady who came to see me a few weeks ago. She was driving on the eastern, the ring road, and she had her 2 children and her niece in the car, and you know what that ring road's like, it's a madhouse. And all of a sudden she realised she had a truck on either side, and she also had her 2 children and her niece. So, mind you, I'm sure her 2 children would have been enough, but she had somebody else's child. Now, what she said, if only there was somewhere I could have pulled over to stop. That was her safety behaviour. See what I'm getting at? And so, whilst they build Westgate bridges and add flyovers off them, and tunnels and underground, railway stations, there'll always be work for psychologists. Because people believe that they are more at risk driving in a lane underground than they are on a lane above ground, which is really not true, is it? I came from Sydney. I got my licence up there, and I had a bit of a panic attack myself. I thought, how can you get across that bridge without hitting each other? And until I realised that everybody kept to their lane. Now, so we've got to be aware that when we're anxious, we are saying, if only the traffic's not busy. If only it's not too hot. As long as it's a quiet time at the shopping centre. We put all these conditions in place that we would be okay if this, then that. These are ways in which we agitate ourselves. So you've got to become aware of your safety behaviours, which might be, if only I've got a drink to hold on to, so my hand won't shake. If only I can stand on the edge of the crowd, near the door, and make an escape if I feel dizzy. So you get the idea? Now, if you
sort of things that could be out of our control, like if you were somewhere and in your 40s, my safety behaviour is to have a glass of water in my hand, If you're somewhere and you don't have it, then you've lost. Because it's something you can't control, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, what I'm saying is the person will become more agitated because they haven't got their, like, when they're, like, see, some people will, some people's safety behaviour is always stay in the left lane. That way you can divert or you can pull over.
So they're relying on something that's external to themselves, not an internal resource kind of thing.
Well, no, it can be either. Like a safety behaviour can be, you know, as long as my heart doesn't start racing. My heart starts racing, I know I'm gone once the panic sets in. So what I'm saying is please know your safety behaviours and challenge them. So the way you've got to challenge them is in so graded. So you don't, you know, when you are listing the things that make you anxious, you've got to have high, moderate, low. So there's a thing called a SUDS rating, which is a 0 to 10. But a better way to try and understand it is just simply 0 to 3 is low, 4 to 6 or 7 is moderate, and 8 to 10 is high. So it's whichever, you know, whichever works for you. So you do graded, and you usually start at something below 5. We can all experience anxiety up to 5 and still function. And I'm talking about hot, you know, a bit stiff, wondering if the words will come out, and then things start to flow. So graded, repeated. So this is what we do in our major intervention for anxiety, which is exposure. Exposure, exposure, exposure. So you've got to, anxiety does not go away. You've got to challenge it. And you increase the intensity and then you prolong it. Now you prolong it in order to find that over time, and I think we've actually got it here. I've gone off script here, so we'll just see if any of this is worthwhile. Oh, well, these are the 8 major anxiety disorders. You probably can't read that, can you? Social anxiety. Please don't notice my inadequacies. You know, I don't want to have to speak or anything like that. Very common. Health anxiety. My God, what is that? What is it? And I showed it to the doctor. He said it was okay, but I didn't tell him it turns blue at 9 o'clock. I better go back tomorrow. You know, so health anxiety, obsessive compulsive disorder. We all know what OCD is, don't we? OCD is the most crippling of the anxiety disorders. Very hard to treat, but it's reversible. Must never forget that. It's reversible. Its onset is mostly in childhood, and the same rates in childhood as it is in adulthood, which is up to 3%. It's a bit hard to believe that there might be 2 or 3 children in the average primary school, 3 or 4, maybe 10, that have got OCD. Panic disorder. This is the experience of everybody has a panic attack at some stage or other, but a person with panic disorder is having a panic attack daily, weekly, 3 or 4 times, presenting at emergency, you know, for heart racing, heart attack, mid-pain and so forth. You can't ignore it. We want them to go there. We want them to go there. What we would prefer is that the intensivists referred them for proper psychological management. But they generally don't. They say, you're fine, you're fine. Off you go. The person will have the same thing happen again. Agoraphobia, this is the You know, that sort of fear that comes in a free-floating way anywhere, can come anywhere. A person can have a panic attack in any situation, and they narrow their world down sometimes to their own bedroom. But if you know your way home, that's the agoraphobic say driving, will only drive in their own community, and they won't go very far. GAD is the common cold of anxiety. People will constantly worry. Post-traumatic stress disorder. Yes, well, we see it everywhere, don't we? And in our society today, with the manifestations of, say, sexual abuse, physical abuse, domestic violence, road trauma, all these sort of things, it's in our face all the time. Phobias are the most common form of anxiety and probably the least treated, you know. They're easy to treat. It's easy to treat phobias. If you do what we're talking about here, graded, repeated, gradually increasing the intensity, people will learn to manage a phobia. You don't have to live with a phobia. People do though. You know why they live with them? It's because if they avoid, they don't experience it. But if they do experience it, whoosh, it just overwhelms. Now, when it comes to the management of anxiety, okay, number one way of dealing with anxiety is to avoid. Number two, seek reassurance. Number three is safety behaviours that we've already talked about. Number four is ritualising. If I do things in a certain way. So ritual's different from safety behaviour. Rituals are what characterises OCD. So people want a feeling of comfort, feeling it's okay. And so they will have to do their rituals in order to get that, what we call a just right feeling. What's the last one? Anyway, all of those things can be resolved with what we call exposure. So in other words, you've got to face your fears, but it's better to face them in a graded manner, because if you go too hard, you'll experience, I'll tell you about one of my failures. One time I had a lady in here at the clinic, and she was, I'm embarrassed, it's many years ago, but anyway, she was frightened of being contaminated by poison. That was, like a lot of people are frightened of asbestos or solvents or fly spray or anything like that. Anyway, she came into the clinic and I said, I'm going to do an exposure that'll really heighten your anxiety. And I got a bottle, and I showed the lady, and I said, I'm putting a wrapper around this bottle, and I'm going to put a skull, this is my skull, and crossbones on it. I said, do you think that'll frighten you? And she said, oh, that will frighten the living daylights out of me. So I said, okay, well, we'll just leave it in your room, and you can habituate to it. You don't know what habituate means. What it means is the first time you see that, it might create a 10. This thing's running out. But what response prevention means Response prevention means you stay. You stay. So you're frightened, but you sit away from it. After all, I've just put a bottle there with a piece of paper on it, and I've drawn a skull and crossbones. It's not, I didn't go down to the chemist and buy a powerful, I was suggesting it was, poisonous. But that didn't matter to her because she was petrified. And so she discharged from the clinic. Now that was many years ago. We all learned lessons from that. And but in that particular way, what I did on that occasion was I set the bar too high. See that? So what you do is you set a target of around about 5 or 6, and you get the person to not run. Just sit there and see what happens. And it's just the same, you know, with a little kid doesn't want to go to the water. You know, the little one, I mean, toddler. Some toddlers just fly in and love it. But others, you've got to sit them near the water and let the tide run in, and, you know, in a day or so, they're all over it. But they stay until they get a graded response. So in the case of these exercises that we do, you set up the exposure and you ask them for what their rating is. These damn pens, their ratings before. So what is your rating before? The person says it's a 6. Okay, now 2 minutes later, we want you to rate. And then after, so 2, 4, 6, 8, 10 minutes later, where is your anxiety? Now this is an experiment. So their anxiety is either going to stay the same, or it's going to get worse, or it's going to get better. Now you then get the person to practice that twice a day for weeks and weeks. So the treatment is called exposure and don't run. Response prevention. Similarly, if a person is saying, I go to a supermarket and as soon as I can't see the traffic outside, in other words, I'm enclosed, I'm out of there. Say, no, go and do your shopping. Focus on the behaviour that you are there for, but just every 5 minutes, stop and rate your anxiety. Does that make sense? Okay. Now, it's not, I don't expect you to go out and do it. I'm just talking to you about it. What we do is we do it in a coached way. That's the lesson I learnt. The lady with the bottle. You don't put it in her room and have her freak out when she walks in. No, you take her in, you sit with her, and you guide her through it. So coached exposure. And you can do that with a family member. You can do it with a friend, that a person can help another person overcome their fear of sitting in a theatre. People don't go to the theatre, only sit on the end of the row, won't sit in the middle, or just don't go at all. Now we can help people with all levels of anxiety by that method I'm talking about. Now I realise I'm running out of time, am I? No, we're going okay. Now let me just keep quiet and just run through these slides. Oh, now this is another strategy. So I was focusing tonight on trying to teach you some strategies. So this is a cue card. Now a cue card is a thing you carry in your wallet because you never know when anxiety is going to hit, do you? That's the frightening thing about it. So if you've got a cue card, and in this particular case, the word is aware. So the A refers to accept this feeling and step back and see it as only part of you. If you see it as all of you, it'll overwhelm you. But it's only part of you. So you watch the level, as we were describing earlier. Is it... Well, no, you were here. What is it? Yeah, subjective unit of distress. Is it low? Is it moderate? Is it high? Because you'll have steps to take according to what it is. So if a person is receiving high anxiety, well, okay, they've got to look after themselves. They've got to have a crisis plan. You don't just say, no, if it's high, just hang in there. No, you've got to have other strategies in place. Now, A is for acting as if you're not distressed. It's not meant to be the coping mechanism, but it's a commonly used mechanism to act as if there's nothing wrong. You're in the kitchen having a heated discussion with your partner and the doorbell rings. Now, do you take your heightened mood and anger to the door? No. You open the door and say, hi, nice to see you. And come in. We're just ripping each other to shreds out the back. No, we act as if there's nothing going on. Similarly, if we think we're perfectly entitled to a raise, we go into our boss and speak eloquently about how we're entitled to a raise, while underneath our heart's racing. You've got to have that front, don't you, to get through life. So acting as if has got its role. Now R refers to, repeat those first three letters, relax, shift attention, do something else, but accept it's part of you, watch the level, act as if you're going to tough it out. You also add those things like what we said before, that we've got to continually refocus. I don't care if you don't remember a single thing I've said tonight. Please remember that idea about paying attention, giving it 100%. When your mind drifts, refocus. And for God's sake, teach your children that, because it's such a powerful thing to know. The E refers to expect this to happen again because emotional distress is normal. It's normal to have it. It's an adaptive mechanism. You expect it. You wish it wasn't happening at that level, but you can handle it. You're learning your high-risk situations and you're learning to handle them better. Now, this is what we were talking about before about... This is the understanding exposure and response prevention. So there's the spider. You run away quickly and your anxiety comes down. So that's avoidance. Stay with it, observe it, perfectly long distance away if you can't hurt you, but over time you'll manage it. Do people have, a lot of people have fear of spiders, don't they? But we don't kill spiders, do we? No. We take a Tupperware has saved spiders. You have a nice long Tupperware and you put it over the spider, the lid on it, and put it out in the back garden. That's my method anyway. Now, the process of habituation is that if you repeatedly expose, it leads to diminishing anxiety in response to a trigger. So there's the spider, it takes longer, but the more you expose yourself to a spider or to anything, progressive exposure to the feared trigger brings about a reduction. Now, you might prefer to take, in the presence of a spider or a crowded tram, to take something that makes you feel a bit better. Just lowers your awareness. You may prefer that. Some people seem to prefer that. But it would be better to see it as not threatening and to learn to deal with it without needing to take heavily sedating medication. I'm not opposed to heavily sedating medication, but I'm opposed to it when it doesn't include behavioural and thinking strategies that might make it much less necessary for you to be less efficient in your functioning. And I speak as someone that speaks to people all the time who are clearly on very heavy medication. So it's very hard to do talking therapy when a person is not able, loses flexibility, loses memory, sleeps poorly and things like that. So it's a question of balance, as in everything else. Well, these sort of things, this is, we want to not feel threatened, not to doubt our ability to deal with issues, not be pessimistic about our negative thinking is something that undoes us all. So the behavioural consequences are we avoid, we procrastinate, and we become impulsive. We make impulsive decisions, break off relationships, leave jobs, give up. We worry about problems and new worries and new problems. And the emotional consequences of this problem orientation all the time is anxiety, depression, irritability, and so forth. I would like to propose a slightly more understandable model here, which would be the things we can't control these are stress. And what we find is they occupy, particular portion of every person's life. It's not going to be very helpful for someone if their stress is taking up this much of their life, is it? But it happens, unfortunately, people. So what we want to try and do is push this over and be focusing on things we can control and enjoy, which equals thriving. This equals what do you call it? Stress and survival. The amygdala is all about survival. Every living creature has got a mechanism for survival. So if it doesn't, it disappears. But we can't run our lives as if it's all threat and fear and doubt and uncertainty and what if, how can I manage, what's the next thing that's going to go along. What we want to do is we want to have our frontal lobes, which is where our working memory resides. And in our working memory we have things that work for us, strategies we've tried before, adaptive learning, which involves what's the problem, what's my plan, what can I put into place, let's try this. And that's how we thrive. Unfortunately, what happens is that when we're overwhelmed by fear and doubt and uncertainty, it shuts down our frontal lobes. It's like I read a study once where they taught people. They did this study of the Buddhist monks, you know, with all their meditative stuff, and of course they were streets ahead of everybody else with the amplitude of their brain waves and how cool they all were and so forth. But that also showed that if anybody did from 5 to 15 minutes a day of self-soothing, in whichever way you want to soothe yourself, you don't have to, you know, walk around looking serene. You don't have to get up at 5 o'clock in the morning and do an hour's meditation. Good on you if you do. If you want to do that, that's great. Whatever floats your boat. But I'm just saying, anybody that can slow down their mind and their body, they open access to their working mind. And they demonstrated, and that's why I did this tape in about 2014. And as I said, it's on my website. And I encourage people to listen to it because they demonstrated that there were alterations in MRIs as a result of people doing 5 to 15 minutes of meditative practice for 12 weeks. Now I thought that's pretty good. That's pretty good. It's worth, but that time you might like cooking, you know, spooning in the risotto, you know, or you just lose yourself in kneading, all that sort of stuff. Other people paint, other people love to listen to music. Gifted people can play music, which must be amazing because it touches part of their mind that no other function does. So if you're musical, use it. So this idea of we want to thrive, and the way to thrive is to have our frontal lobes, which we are way ahead of any other creature on this earth in the development of our frontal lobes. And that's where adaptive learning occurs. That's what we want. Now, keeping going. So, here, these are simple problem-solving techniques. What's the problem? What's your plan? I'm shortening this because we're running out of time. What's your problem? What's your plan? What's the very hard question? Are you keeping to your plan? No, of course you're not keeping to your plan. But if you did keep to your plan, there's a chance the outcome would be better. But this is a lot longer. Goal, target, brainstorming, pros and cons, a solution that's practicable, workable. You know, Rio sounds a great idea, but it's not practical, unfortunately. So what is practical? Maybe just going to a movie. How will you carry out the solution? What will you know if the solution is working? Feedback and review and change. Change it if it's not working. Now, I'm not going to do this. This is just stuff about, we will do it very quickly. Some people think worry is very useful. It aids your problem solving. But the question is, do you actually solve the problem by worrying about it? Or you're just going over and over the same stuff? Are you confusing thought, worry, with action, problem solving? Perhaps you are. You're much better off. The best way to get something done is to begin. Begin. Does worry protect against negative emotions and outcomes? Has anything ever happened, even after you worried about it like crazy? Have things gone well when you didn't have time to worry? Does worrying actually increase your unhappiness and anxiety sometimes? Mark Twain said, I've spent most of my life worrying about things that didn't happen. And I think we could all probably fit into that category. Just a quick point here about worriers. They worry in words and avoid scary images, thus avoiding fear and interfere with their emotional processing of fears. We haven't got time to go into that, but so I've got a whole thing here. But if you want the slides, I can send them to you. Because I want to show you this one. You can't read that, can you? Or can you? You can read that? I love behavioural experiments. These are fantastic things. Because what you want to do is you want to realise that what you predict doesn't actually turn out. That's the best way to learn. So issues between Helen and I remain unresolved. No shift in attitude by us. She goes into manager mode. I really hate it and start my petulant reaction of shutting down, still prepared to keep trying to improve things, only one life to live. This is a real case. Don't you think that sounds an interesting construction of it? That's the way they put it. It seems prediction, there's never enough time to implement a change strategy. Helen adopts the directive approach that can be nasty but effective and leaves me feeling like a child or more like an employee. You know, this is the bloke whinging, see, do this, do that. We need to keep working together to make even small changes, point out what it is in their own behaviour that is off. Bring list of prompt points to next session. Now, the experiment, we have to set a time up to discuss particular circumstances. Be collaborative. Don't get focused on our symptoms. Expect to be anxious. I'm 75% certain I can get this done. Do you ever heard that rule before, the 75% rule? Any of you heard that? You don't expect to be 100% certain that something will work out, because it's too easy, isn't it? You don't want to go for something where it's only 50-50 certainty, because it's going to foul up. It's just too each way. You want to have 75% certainty that you're ready for this step. And you've only just got to take that one extra step. And that's got more chance of achieving your goal. Each one has to be prepared to listen, even try to explain how they see the other person is thinking. Both promise to read up on working on irritability management. So what was the outcome? We did keep to the agreed plan, very encouraging. Prediction of anxiety was only partly true. Anxiety seemed better when task goal was reachable. Once we got started, our mood settled. What we learned from it, the problem of getting agitated beforehand, not to be in my head with worry. What's he going to say? What's he going to say in front of him? That sort of stuff. Doing something for each other each day is worth trying. To see myself as others see me, that's a gift that would help me to try changing and open up the possibility of healing. I'd invite you to try one of those. Do you get the idea? That you predict something and see if it turns out the way you predicted it. Now, this sounds like a commercial, but I did write a book about 4 years ago. It hasn't flown off the shelves, but it is available. It's a dummies book, a book on anxiety called Overcoming Anxiety for Dummies. Anyway, on the website there is a cheat sheet where they encourage people to buy the book. So I just bought that along just to run through it for you, because you probably can't find it even if you did go looking for it. But 7 ways, that's what we're going to finish up on. 7 ways to deal with emotional distress. To accept that all kinds of thoughts, good and bad, come into our mind as a normal thing. In normal experience, they pop in and pop out. But when the mood is low, they're more persistent and disturbing. This is actually the biggest problem for people with OCD, is they have these very distressing and disturbing thoughts completely against their values, but they torture them. Whereas the non-OCD person, what? Where'd that come from? And just let it go through to the keeper. The OCD person is absolutely churned by it. Bad thought, bad mind, bad person. Remember that we were talking about taking a step back, and this is another example of a cue card. I am separate from my thoughts. And try to steady yourself with this slow breathing technique. Breathe in, 2, 3, 4, hold. Exhale, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. As long as you can. So you breathe in, hold, then because you're trying to get that carbon dioxide out of your system. Because if you're getting agitated, and then you start getting symptoms. Whoa, I'm spinning, I can't stand up, and you get a panic attack. Create a pause that slows down your immediate reaction and start processing the upsetting thought. It's just a thought. Let it go through to the keeper. Reflect on your thoughts and feelings. Can you notice the particular part of your body where these thoughts create tension? So in other words, if you talk to a person with anxiety and you say, where do you feel it? Here. Oh, neck. Oh, it gets me here. My stomach. Everybody has got a physical signature of their tension. Now, how long do they last? Do they stay the same? Do they shift over time? Can you shift that intensity by learning to shift attention elsewhere? Refocus, the same point. Refocus. I don't like this feeling. I wish it wasn't happening. I'm going to sit with it and let it fade over time. Now, be open to experiences, don't shut them down, learn something from them. Can you notice that you can soften their impact by moving attention away? So the first thing you do when you feel distress is to create a pause. Step back. Just step back. That's the start of the change. You don't become impulsive. Knowing it's really important to you to get back in touch with what interests you so the negative stuff does not stop you from engaging with life. So if you say a thought comes to your mind, which is, say, an angry thought or a nasty thought or a thought, totally destructive thought. Now, do you say, oh my God, this is important, I've got to stop this, I've got to worry about it, I've got to think about it, I've got to control it? You're only reinforcing it. Because what we want you to do is let it go through to the keeper and shift attention elsewhere. Now think about yourself. Am I more irritable? Do I not want to see people? Am I not sleeping, eating well, exercising? Have I lost my curiosity about trying new things? If you want to be a human, never lose your curiosity. Stay alive, you know. Do I laugh much? Am I not opening mail, checking emails, answering the phone? Can you sense the swing backwards and forwards between almost normal we were talking about that thing called stress before. It's coming down like the sword of Damocles. And what it does is it destabilises us. So at one end, I won't write it because it's there, I'm almost normal. I'm not normal, but I'm almost normal. At the other end, I'm totaled. I'm out of it. Now, that's the chaos that comes from destabilisation under stress. What we want to do is reintegrate the person and slow that agitation down so they can reintegrate. Now, how do they do that? We do it through relaxation, and we do it through calmness, we do it communicating with other people, hobbies, getting involved, and I hope I've got time to finish off with one more thing. You've got to learn new skills and be in the present. Okay, so this is not anonymous. It is anonymous actually, but I read this in a book and I adapted it. CBT in verse. One ship sails east, another sails west, both with the same breezes blowing. 'Tis the set of the sails, not the force of the gales, that takes them where they're going. So in other words, how are your sails set? You know, are you going around in circles? Or are you sailing against the wind? Or are you with the wind? But it's up to you to set your own sails. Now, in the aforementioned book, there is a little description of a technique for reducing anxiety sensitivity. Because that's the trouble. We're so sensitive to anxiety. So what you do is you teach yourself, it's one of those high impact training exercises. But you do hyperventilation training. Hyperventilation training is best done by deep chest breathing. With me? That's hyperventilation training, okay? You do it for 10 seconds, 15 seconds rest, 10 seconds, 15 seconds rest, 10 seconds more. So that takes you less than a minute to do that. At the end of it, you rate how distressed you feel and how similar is that to experiences of anxiety that you have. Now, level 1 is 10 to 20 seconds. Level 2 is 20 to 40 seconds. So in other words, you do 40 seconds, 15 seconds rest, 40 seconds, 15 seconds rest, 40 seconds. Like a midfielder. Get up there and gut run, you know, because you've got to pump it out even though you're feeling it. Now, the jocks that come to see me, of course I see lots of very fit young men and women, what they want to do is do 60 seconds flat out from the beginning. So no, we want you to build up this method of gradual increase of intensity of hyperventilation. Because what you do is you acquire the knowledge that hyperventilation is harmless. And even though it produces symptoms, they pass quickly. And the second thing that you learn is the catastrophic thinking completely reduces. So I'm just saying, I don't expect any of you to rush off and do it, but ask your therapist to teach you how to do it. That'd be the best way to do it. If the therapist wants to learn how to do it, well, they'll better look it up on the... No, look, we've got copies of it at work, actually. If anybody wants it, you can just email me and we'll send you a copy of it. But it's a fabulous technique because we can't stand anxiety. And there are people that will take Valium 3 times a day just to avoid anxiety. Aren't there? No show of hands, thank you. But we don't we understand that people are being treated with that, and I respect that. But a lot of people have to come down off it, and it takes them a long, long time to come off it. And these behavioural strategies are fantastic if only people would learn them and implement them.